what's the underlying cause, what's going on for people. We have this wonderful opportunity, what we can do to change the conversation and the way medicine looks like.
Well, hey everyone, welcome into Pushing the Limits. Today I'm super excited. I've got one of my dearest friends and mentors and teachers, Dr. Elizabeth Harris, with me. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth. Fantastic to have you. I'm so excited to share your amazing talents with everybody and knowledge with everyone. It's going to be cool. It's really going to be cool. So, Elizabeth, can you give everybody a little bit of background on yourself, where you come from, where you live, where you're trained, and all of that sort of good stuff?
Sure, yeah. So I originally come from America, and my family didn't necessarily agree with the Vietnam War, and so they moved to New Zealand. And I did all my training at the University of Otago here in Dunedin, where I am still living. And so, yeah, I just have to say it's like such an honor to be on here. I remember when you very first contacted me. So I was driving up and down the road because I work in rural hospitals, and I'd be listening to your podcast. And then when you emailed me, it was like, oh my gosh, Lisa Tumity emailed me. And you asked me then, it must have been, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, if I would go on your podcast. And I was thinking, are you kidding me?
Oh, you're too kind.
No, it's actually the truth. It is really the truth. I was very starstruck.
Oh, right. There's no need to be, obviously. And now you know the truth about my life. You're probably not starstruck at all. No, but honestly, Elizabeth, you've been a fantastic mentor to me over the last few years. You've helped me so much. You've taught me so much. And I'm just in awe of your very deep knowledge in so many areas. And we're going to dive deep into some of those things today, especially around brain health and biofeedback and all the training you've been doing with Dr. Mark Gordon, who of course has been on the show, and Dr. Dale Bredesen and people like that have also been on. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about your history as a doctor, because you've worked in many different fields, but how did you come to be running a brain health and biofeedback clinic, so to speak?
Yeah, so I guess for many of us who are not so enlightened, there's some enlightened people like Dr. Tim Ewer and Mapua who get into the field, who get into this field just because they don't need a great big whack up the side of the head to figure out what's going on. But for me, it was from my experience medically in my family for myself and largely my son. And so I guess it started with our son, and when he was born, like he would fall over a lot, so he hit his head a lot, and his balance wasn't that great, and he just had all these behavioral problems. He would be the kid in the supermarket, in the middle of the aisle having a fit because he couldn't have Superman or something. Yeah. So, and you knew that this kid just had a beautiful heart, and he didn't have ADHD and he didn't have autism. And the question was, what was wrong? And I remember reading about craniosacral therapy, and here I was, a conventional doctor, and at that stage you think, well, we're going to try something else. And lo and behold, taking him to a craniosacral therapist really made a huge difference. And from there, it was a stepwise progression of discovering a number of things: craniosacral therapy, phosphatidylserine and omega-3s, and then retained primitive reflexes. And so I actually got him on a plane and flew him over to Australia. I guess he would have been about 9 or 10, completely changed our life. We never had our kids, and so if they were naughty, they had to go and stand outside the door. And within 20 minutes every morning, he'd be outside the door. And if you could figure out what it was that was going to upset him, don't touch his trucks or, something like that, it would have been okay, but it was never predictable. So it turned out that he had cryptopyrroles, which I only learned later when I started going off to various trainings and things. So there was what went on for him, and being able to see what a difference that made, and the volume of information that was there that we never learned about in medical school. And so then for myself, in about 2004, I was tramping the Milford track, and it was in a family group. I was with my daughter, who was 9 at the time. and other parents and children. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and in the end, I had a particular arrhythmia called SVT, which I'd never had before. And it's where your heart is racing and you definitely feel like you're going to die. And it's,
Yeah, it's scary.
yeah, and you're kind of way out somewhere where you can't leave. And so the group that we were tramping with, they kind of left myself and my daughter and kept on tramping because they were really keen on tramping. They didn't.
Oh
And
dear.
yeah, and so
Nice.
yeah, and so we were there for another night, and I kind of was saying to people, you know, when you get out, can you tell somebody I think I'm probably going to need to be flown out or something. And so another night of racing heart, and so yeah, a helicopter did turn up, and
Wow.
the irony of it was that the person that stayed with me was the head of the New Zealand Skeptic Society.
The one
I
that
was
stood
like,
by you.
yeah, the universe is really interesting, hey?
Yeah, it is.
And so I got flown out on this and I honestly have to tell you, if there's anything that you need to put on your bucket list, a helicopter ride through the Milford is,
It would be
no, it
one of them.
seriously is. It is just gorgeous.
Maybe not in that way.
Maybe not in that way. Yeah, so I got off the helicopter with my daughter after 2 nights of pretty much not sleeping, and immediately, of course, I thought that didn't just happen. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine, and I went back to working, and I was having palpitations, and then I started developing weird and wonderful symptoms. I would get numbness in an arm or a leg, or I was incredibly tired. I developed incredible anxiety, like from 1 second to the next. I didn't know how I was going to survive. Joint pain, and it dawned on me that all of this arrived at once, and I thought, there's got to be something that caused this. And I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I thought, right, I'm going to go, and I did the whole course. I did all the exercises. It didn't work. And I hate to admit, I thought, stuff that, I'm not going to be swallowing those antidepressants and anxiety
No.
medicines.
Yeah.
It's got to be something else. And I didn't know what it was. And I've got two cousins with MS, and I pretty much figured it was, by God, I wasn't going to get into an MRI machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted to figure out what the underlying cause was, and I had too much to live for, and I couldn't figure it. And this is the honest truth. We went off to Nelson, and I pretty much just said to the universe, look, you know, you made me. If you want me to know what this is, that's great. And if not, I'm just going to keep on going because I just really trust you. And within about 3 days, I started thinking about I'd had an amalgam filling put in.
Wow. Yep.
And it
Yep.
was, yeah, and so I had this tooth that kind of broke, and I went to the dentist, and he drilled it. He said, "Do you want some local?" I said, "Well, no, let's try without." And I couldn't feel anything. I was just amazed. It's a little bit like Feynman, you know, if you read Feynman, he's just so fascinated by so many things. I was, wow, that's really amazing. I could have this happen and I don't even feel it. And they told me I needed a root canal, got the root canal,
Oh,
and
not good.
yeah, and when I was sitting in the chair afterwards, they were filling it, and the guy said he was going to put amalgam in, and I didn't really know very much. And when he said that, I said, "Oh, I thought I'd heard that amalgams are not a good idea." And oh, God, you know, they're
They're
fine.
fine. That's so
So,
sweet.
so yeah, I was off in Nelson, and we got back. There were no computers, you know, on your phone at that time. You get in and you look on the computer, and there it was. There it was. It was amalgams and root canals and how they can cause problems. And I was
Yeah.
so lucky. I got onto some forums, and there was a wonderful doctor up in the North Island who had had similar problems, and she talked to me for an hour. And at that time, Jacques Imbo, who was the dentist, the holistic dentist in New Zealand, really, he was overseas. And so I got on a plane. And before that, I had a fear of flying. So here I am with massive anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah.
On a plane. And I went to Australia, and I went to see Andrew Taylor, who's an amazing dentist in Newrabar. And I got there, and his practice is in a paddock, right? And I got there, and I thought, oh no, what have I done? Like, this
Yeah.
is some, and
Crazy.
yeah, and I got in there, and there he was with his Zeiss microscope, and I thought, it's okay.
He knows what
I'm
he's
in the
doing.
wrong place. And while I was lying there, you know, with my mouth open, I'm never emotional, but he saved my life.
Wow. 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 Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if I'd be here, and I don't think that I'd be here,
Wow.
not in a wheelchair.
Not, yeah, without MS,
Yeah,
20 years later.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
yep, yep.
And what struck me was that this guy, he never knew me. He didn't know me. And before he knew me, he got on a plane.
Yep.
He went to
Wow.
America. He trained. He had a cavitat scan. It was a very specialized scan for telling whether there was infection in the bone, which is actually what I had.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and he did all that without ever knowing me, and it was against what the dental council kind
Yep.
of thought at the time.
Yep.
And I
Sure.
recognized completely that it
Mm-hmm.
saved my life. And I was lying there, and he said to me, "You've got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to do this. This it."
Get
So
get rid get rid of us. Yeah, right. So,
no,
yeah,
you've got to go help people.
yeah,
You're,
yeah, yeah.
you're not the only one. You know,
Wow. See, that was the
I see.
universe going, okay, you gotta pay back now.
Yeah, yeah. And he told
Wow.
me, I was in the chair, he told me about, I mean, this sounds wild. It sounds unbelievable. And the stuff that I've seen since then, it's like
Mm.
wild and unbelievable. He had a patient who had a brain tumor, and they had an infected root canal, and he
Yeah,
took it out, and the brain tumor resolved. You hear that and you think, oh, yeah, come on, really?
yeah.
But I've since then, there's one thing after another where people are treating things that we usually can't treat and making a difference. And so,
Yep.
so it was a slow recovery from there, and learning about mercury detox and things like that. And then,
Of course, Dr. Thomas Levy, who's been on the show 3 or 4 times, of course, he's written the book Hidden Epidemic, and he's the reason that this year I got all 11 root canals taken out of my mouth because I had 11. And
11.
so
Oh my,
11.
see,
And
that
so,
shows how tough you are.
oh
One,
yeah, it's been a rough
one
year.
takes me out.
No, it's been a rough year. It's been a rough year, but I'm really grateful to Dr. Levy to bring it to my attention because that's, the cause of, he says, and you read the book Hidden Epidemic, that it leads to a lot of brain tumors and also breast cancer because your lymph goes right through your breast tissue here as well as heart disease, of course. And so when I watched his documentary and read his book and had Dr. Levy on, I'm like, right, these got to come out. And it's a similar story, like I'd had a scare last year with breast cancer and it turned out to be benign, thank God. It was a lump that was benign, but
Remember.
it put me on like, okay, right, sort your shit out now. And it was extremely expensive and it's extremely painful and it's a long drawn out process of getting implants and all the rest of the stuff. But your story just reinforces that I'm on the right track, because your teeth are just so important. We don't know how
Yeah.
important these things are. They are just really, yeah,
Yeah.
next level.
My charger.
Yeah, okay, your computer charger's going.
It is so important, yeah. And actually, I'd like to explain why that is. And so what happens is that if you have a look at the tooth is made of dentine, and then it's
Mm-hmm,
got enamel on the top. And the
mm-hmm,
dentine has a whole lot of dentine tubules.
mm-hmm.
And so a front incisor has, and this is the truth, if you line up all the dentine tubules in a front incisor, it's 1 kilometer long.
Wow, wow, wow. Mm.
Yeah. And so then I'm going to disappear under my desk. This is really well
Just,
prepared.
yeah, she's got to put the charger in, forgot to put
Yeah,
the
you can see
charger
my
in.
background. And then I'll bring this up again. So, and so what they did this really unethical study in Japan, where they took people and they got a tooth that was actually infected, which is the reason why most people have root canals, and they root canaled it, and then they root canaled a tooth on the other side, and then I'm just moving things around to prepare here. There. And they root canaled a tooth on the other side. And then I don't know, I think it was like 3 months, they extracted both teeth, sectioned them, had a look at them under the microscope. And what they saw is in the tooth that needed a root canal, was infected before they started, there were all these bacteria tracking up the dentine tubules. Now, what happens is the bacteria are aerobes, and they become what we call facultative anaerobes. And that means that they consume they have to metabolize without oxygen. And when they do that, they produce a huge amount of really toxic materials in nanogram quantities. And
Wow,
then what they also do is they change the nature of the mercury in the mouth so that it's about 50 times more toxic.
wow.
There's reasons why a root canal causes problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so for some people, if their detox systems are not that good, then they're having issues with these toxins both the mercury and the toxins that are directly produced by the bacteria. They're trapped in the teeth, and the tooth that they took out that wasn't infected before they root canaled it on the other side didn't have all those bacteria tracking up the dentine tubules, and the white cells are too big to be able to get into the dentine tubules to be able to fight those bacteria. So yeah.
Wow. That thanks for that explanation, because that's so people, if you've had a root canal, go to a dentist who has a cone beam X-ray. So it's a special type of X-ray. It has to be cone beam. You don't see it on a normal X-ray. And so I experienced this, and Dr. Levy told me to go and get a cone beam. And I went first, and my dentist was not keen on doing a cone beam because of the radiation. I said, no, I want one. As he did a normal X-ray, it came back normal. He did the cone beam straight after it, and it came back, oh my God, you've got abscesses right throughout your mouth. And I'm like, yeah, and that's why I'm here.
Yes.
So Dr. Levy probably saved my life, because, like what would have happened in the future. And, I've had all sorts of, I've got very poor detox genes as well. So that would, put on top of that. So if you have a root canal, go and get it checked. Cavitations are another thing. Can you explain cavitations as opposed to what a root canal is?
Yeah, so that's what you're talking about. In terms of a cone beam CT, it's not going to be able to see the dentine tubules; they're too small. But what it is looking for is these things, which have been termed cavitation. So a cavitation, there was a gentleman in the 1930s who wrote a textbook of dentistry by the last name of Black, and what he talked about was cavities not only in the teeth but in the jawbone as well. Jawbone is an end blood supply. What that means is that the blood goes up the carotids and it winds around and around and around, and the hose pressure isn't very high by the time that it gets there. And so the immune system has a little bit of a struggle being able to fight things. Another place in the body where we see this is the head of the femur.
All right.
So people, if they have a fractured neck of femur, often we're going to be replacing that because the blood supply is just not going to come back because it's an end blood supply.
Okay.
And so for families where there's autoimmunity or any sort of inflammation in the family, then there's a higher rate of this issue happening with poor blood supply in the jaw and infections. A cone beam CT, so it's a CT, it looks like a 3D rendition of the jaw. And so we refer to John Hamilton here at Synergy Dental down in Dunedin, who's like just across the road. We live, and we've got our clinic in this most amazing place with a lot of really cool people around. And we'll often have people come. We have patients fly from all over New Zealand. We don't advertise. People kind of hear about us by word of mouth.
Yeah, I send a lot of them to you. And we work on a number of cases
Yeah,
together.
we do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so we'll send them off to John, and so what we can do is we can drive up and down what we call it the volume, so the whole area that CT has been taken in, and so we can scan through, and it'll go through the sinuses and through the teeth, and also you can take a tooth and literally spin around it. And what will happen in some people who have root canals is that they can get a persistent infection around there. I've had a patient who I sent off to the dentist, and I said, look, you need a cone beam. They did it OPG. No, I think they just did a plain x-ray, and it looked fine. And then we got a cone beam. This person had three teeth sitting in a pool of pus. There were teeth, there was pus literally connecting those three teeth, and you could not see it until you had a cone beam. I've got another patient in the practice. She came in, she had terrible migraines, and she had been to see her doctor and other doctors, a neurologist, and she had these ongoing migraines. We got a cone beam CT, and then it showed that she had infection there, and also that she, and looking at it dental-wise, she had a degree of gingivitis, and we used low level laser. So she would do low level laser every day. I lent her my laser, and that resolved her migraines. So the connection between dental health, the areas where we're often missing things in standard medicine is dental health, gut health, and things like that. So I guess that brings me on to one of the things that I, thank you so much for inviting me to talk here. And I think the message that if I've got the opportunity to give to people is that we have this wonderful opportunity, what we can do to change the conversation and the way medicine looks like.
Yes.
I guess one of the people that I want to about a little bit is Dr. Peter Attia, and there's Andrew Huberman, and all these people who are talking about basic physiological processes. And Lisa, that's the way that you work, figuring out what's the underlying cause, what's going on for people. And in medicine, in medical school, we learn about for physiology in first year, and then we kind of drift away and we get more into making a diagnosis and treating a symptom. And and so at our clinic, what we're doing and what all functional medicine doctors do and like naturopaths is we look at the underlying physiology is the name for how the body works. And there's these different areas like the gut and the microbiome. And so right at the moment, there's this, Dr. Dale Bredesen talks about it, complexity gap, where in medicine we're taking people who are incredibly complex. We've got trillions of cells, and we've got nerves and hormones. We've got, if you look at a single cell, it turns out that most cells in the body have something called a primary cilia, which is almost like an antenna. That this is actually the truth. So polycystic kidney disease is a genetic mutation in one of the genes in the primary cilia. So this is not alternative, right? And so the communication between the cells and how that occurs, it's so complex. And when we get somebody in front of us who's got chronic fatigue, or they've got symptoms like I had, we do a full blood count, a liver function, a kidney function. We might do their iron studies, maybe their thyroid, maybe their anti-nuclear antibodies for autoimmune disease. And yet the research and all the things that you talk about on your podcast and why I admire you so greatly show that there's this great depth and complexity. And right at the moment, we're in a really interesting place, both in society and medicine, where in society, it's almost like a perfect storm. The two things that our clinic works on are hormesis and biofeedback. And so if I just let you know, so hormesis is the process whereby you do something and it makes you stronger. So like if you go to the gym, it kind of breaks a few muscle fibers and your body goes, oh, I better build more muscle. And so in the way that we lived as humans in the past, we would naturally have hormetic processes in our environment. And so exercise and even diet, some of the proanthocyanins and things like that cause a hormetic stress on the body and cause it to be stronger. And so we've kind of engineered a lot of that out of our life with cars. We don't need to walk anymore, and processed food we're not getting. And then biofeedback.
Damp and cold and
That's right, yeah. And so then biofeedback, in our environment, we have things that if we listen, we learn. But at the moment, say people, for example, get gut symptoms, so they go to the doctor, and what do? We give them omeprazole, or we give them a proton pump inhibitor, and we take away the feedback to them that something's wrong. By taking away the symptoms. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. It doesn't mean that anything that we're doing is wrong. It's not the full stop.
No, it's not the end point, it's the Band-Aid.
It's not it's the, and so the question is, how can we deliver this wealth of knowledge that you talk about, the wealth of knowledge that's in the research on the ground? And so I'm on the ground. I work in emergency departments. I work in hospital wards, and so I'm a GP by training. And pretty much every week I'm working in hospitals, and actually what I do is I work in the hospital and fire that money into the clinic, because this is what we're really passionate about. We're passionate about what would it take to deliver medicine 3.0 on the ground, and what do the systems look like, and how do we manage that? And so because for example, about 2 years ago, I had a psychiatry registrar from the hospital email me, and he said to me in this email, he said, I've had a look at your website, and you say that you address anxiety, and there's not a single thing on your website that's listed in the New Zealand guideline for the treatment of anxiety. How do you justify getting out of bed in the morning?
Oh my God.
Really?
Really?
It was really good. No, it was great. It was great. And what was great about it was that I thought, here's a kindred soul. Here's somebody who's really passionate about
You're very kind.
No, but he's really passionate about what he does, and that's great. Passion is the base for all drive, right? And it's great that he believes in what he's doing. And then I thought about it, and I thought, so here's all this research, for example, on the microbiome and how that affects the brain and how the impact that it has in psychiatry. We're not
Yeah.
talking one or two papers. We're talking
No,
thousands.
no,
We're
we're
talking
talking.
we're
Yep.
talking whole conferences on this, and
Hmm.
there is not a single microbiome test done.
Yeah, see, did you flip that back at him and go, well, hell, there's not a single thing on your website about any of this stuff.
No,
Now it just makes me
so
angry.
you'll know this whenever you'll have had family members or people who are
Yeah.
really convinced of a certain thing, and when you
Mm,
talk to them, what they hear is they hear a nut job, or they hear
mm,
somebody that they ascertain to be crazy, or because the
mm,
paradigm is different. And so
mm-hmm.
if you're going to come to people, how are you going to come to them? How are you going to have it so that they understand? And we all understand the language of data, which I'll come back to. But for this registrar, I thought about it, and I thought, well, if they were going to do microbiome analyses, then they would have to understand about Fecali-Pritznitzii. They would have to understand about
Exactly, like we do.
Akkermansia mesonephila, and what would
Mm.
they do if it was low? And there's this whole, and they're
Gap.
already overloaded. Like the whole system is overloaded. I go into the emergency department, and we've got, like, some days we've got patients in the waiting room, down one hall, down the other
Yeah,
hall. I take them into
horrific.
patients to, and I go into each room, and there's somebody in there, and so what are we going to do? So and and uh, and
Yeah,
so I
third world in our emergency departments. It's pretty bad.
well, and that's because of this perfect storm of people who are in environments where they don't have the hormetic stress to strengthen their body, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the biofeedback to figure out that something's actually wrong. The symptoms
Mm.
are taken away until they develop so many underlying conditions in their physiology, that they're actually in quite a bit of trouble. And then we're just dancing over the top of it with lots of different medicines, people coming in with 15 different medications.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong, people are living longer on those things than they would otherwise, and I would never not give them. But the question is there something else that we could be doing? Do we have the potential to be changing the conversation? The answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
absolutely yes. And so I guess if we dive down into a particular area to look at that and what that would look like in our clinic, the one of the big things that we're looking at is head injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that started years ago. I was working in Currao in the South Island, and I was the only doctor in the practice, which was great. You get to see everything that comes through the door, and there was a family there, and one of the guys, and he got punted over a fence by a bull. And
Oh,
about 6 months later, he had to quit work, and he came in. I ordered an MRI for him, and it's important to know 70% of people who have had a head injury and have ongoing post-concussion syndrome have nothing to show on their MRI. That doesn't
exactly.
problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in this particular case, we could see hemosiderin staining. So that means it's like old blood staining on the brain. And he'd had this head injury. And I said to him, look, the reason why this has happened, your mood has changed and all of that is because of this previous head injury. So we were able to get him on ACC. But then I became curious. I was like, there's got to be something more that we can do. And so I went off on this journey, and that's how that started. And so if we're now looking at physiology, because we've talked about that, and how we address head injury, because we have people fly from around New Zealand,
Mm.
yes, about long-term post-concussion syndrome. And what we're doing is we're applying very much I mean, you've had Mark on the program, and he
Yeah.
talks about hormones. And so the Mark Gordon protocol, and then we're kind of almost, Dale Bredesen talks about this as well, the 6 different areas that will cause dementia. There are these different things that will cause ongoing post-concussion syndrome. Dr. Gordon also tests for heavy metals.
Mm-hmm.
We do that through tissue analysis. But then we'll be looking at the microbiome. Dr. Gordon's recently been talking about microbiome changes in those with post-concussion syndrome. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of going through for a person and saying, what's going on in this pocket of the physiology, this pocket, and
Exactly.
different for different people. And so I guess maybe if I give you a case history of somebody, and of course I'm going to give you, I was thinking about this before I talked to you, and I was thinking, oh, well, if I just tell you all the good bits, there are people that, you struggle to help. And every day we're
Yep.
busy pushing that envelope of code. Okay, so this person hasn't been helped. What else is there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes it just doesn't work. We throw the bus at it and we're still scratching our heads as to why.
And that's when you learn more. And that's when you get on a plane, you go overseas, you go visit another clinic, and yeah. And so I guess, you know, an example would be, we had a gentleman come, I guess in his 60s or 70s. He came with his partner who had left him 6 weeks before, but still cared enough about him that she wanted to support him. And he was angry. And she had been married to him for about 20 years. He'd always been angry. And she never knew him any different, but he'd gotten worse. And he'd pretty much gone through andropause. And so they ran a farm, and he was kind of yelling at the people that were working for them, and she was worried he was going to lose not only the marriage but the farm as well. And his history was that he he played rugby overseas when he was younger, and he'd fallen down a waterfall and fractured his skull when he was, I guess, in his 20s or 30s. And so he'd had this history of head injury, and we did what we usually do. And in this particular occasion, it's different from everybody. I happen to have some plasmalogens in my office.
Yep, we're both fans of that. Dr. Jane Goodenow, who's been on the show, and I use plasmalogens all the time. Thanks to you.
Yeah. So we run something called the SCAT-5. Page 3 of the SCAT-5 is a symptom questionnaire, and a lot of the people that we have that come in with post-concussion syndrome have a SCAT-5 of around 70 or something. It should really be 0, but and so his was in the 70s, and I gave him some plasmalogens, and literally, I am not kidding, but 2 or 3 days later, his SCAT-5 score was 0. He was not angry at all. His wife, who was still, you know, talking with him and trying to help him, had never even met him like this, who he actually was. And so needless to say, fairly quickly they got back together. And so he stayed on the plasmalogens, but he was still needing them, you know, like, and we did a few other things. And I was thinking, so plasmalogens are a terminal stop for oxidative damage. So oxidative damaging molecules will break plasmalogens, and then the plasmalogens are needed for the fusion of synaptic vesicles at the synaptic membrane for neurotransmission to occur, and so then the nerves can't work. And so the question was, what was causing the oxidative damage that was consuming his plasmalogens that he needed so many? And they're very expensive.
Yeah, they're very expensive, unfortunately.
In this particular case, we ran something called an oligoscan, which doesn't have I like to be really honest with our patients, what's got research and what doesn't. Hair analysis has got more research. Oligoscan is used by a lot of people who you know, previously used hair analysis, and we do see clinical utility in that. Anyway, we ran an oligoscan. His mercury was off the chart, and this is not to say that everybody has a dental problem. I'm very careful not to do that.
No.
And so we sent him off. There's a wonderful dentist up in Christchurch, dentists on Maryvale, and they're holistic dentists, and they do a really great job. I've had patients go there and just rave about the treatment, about the efficacy, and how they feel afterwards. And so he went and got that done, and oh my gosh, Lisa, oh my gosh, like seriously, he came back and he was sitting on my couch. And it was like, in medicine, I often say to patients, I wish that at graduation they handed us out a magic wand. There's so many times that you wish that you could just help people and straight away. Like,
and this was one of those.
And he was sitting there, and he was just a different person. He was the person that you wished for him. He was quiet like a lamb, just so calm and happy and just normal, fine. And he had become a support person in his community, and so people were coming over to his house, and he had big potluck dinners, you know, when things were tough in the farming world, and so
Well, just I mean, you don't always have those overnight successes, you know. Like, and I've used plasmalogens a lot with my mum, and they've definitely been a part of her, you know, being as well as she is. But they are quite expensive. There's glia and there's neuro, and thanks for explaining that, because it's pretty complex science, and it's hard to explain what plasmalogens do, but it's in the membranes of the cells, and they very powerful for things that are like going to help with the myelin sheaths, as well as the transmission between the neurons. And so, yeah, now coming back to your brain clinic, because you have a whole lot of modalities. You also work with the amazing Louise Bashel,
Yes.
who's a neurochiro friend of ours. Shout
Yeah.
out to Louise, brilliant person. And tell me about some of the modalities that you use and some of the trainings and the hormones, because the hormones, and I think thyroid is another really key place where you have expertise that I'm still learning thyroid, and there's so much to learn about thyroid. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the modalities that you use? And then, yeah, maybe we can talk about thyroid at the end, because I'd love to touch on thyroid and how powerful that is. We've got a patient that we're working on together at the moment whose thyroid's all up the whoopsies, which is, contributing to the brain dysfunction. Like it can be very, very powerful when your thyroid's not working properly. So yeah, just tell us a little bit. You've got a CVAC machine. That was Tony Robbins, I believe. Tell us what that does.
Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, when we're looking at a patient, we're looking at them in a number of different baskets. And so one of the baskets is biochemical. And so many of the things that you talk about, the microbiome, how that's affecting everything, and hormones all fall into that biochemical basket. And so I'll see people, I'll take a history, and then we'll be ordering specialized tests here in the standard labs where you can get a blood count and a kidney function. There are other tests that are available. Unfortunately, it's overseas, and it's a bit of a trick. You have to organize a kit to come with the patient. Often they have to go to the lab and get a blood test taken on a Monday, and then it gets sent up to the North Island, and it's bulk sent over to Australia. There's a couple of distribution companies in New Zealand that deal with that. And so we're looking at this broader range of testing. So that's the biochemical and the hormone component, and having had Mark Gordon on the podcast and Dale Bredesen, that's what they cover.
Yeah.
Then there's the structural component, and we're so lucky to have Louise come into the practice. And so when I took my son overseas and flew him to Australia, I took him to a functional neurochiro, Susan Walker, in Brisbane, and changed our lives. And so when I first started this clinic, it was like a dream. Oh, I wish that I had a functional neurochiro. And she contacted me and she said, I'm coming down. She got on a plane.
Wow.
She
Cool.
came down, and she's been coming ever since. And so every month, pretty much, for 6 days, Louise is here, and she just
Amazing.
makes such a difference. Because when you're looking at somebody, there's the biochemistry and what I do, there's the structural part, and we're also so lucky to have Rebecca White come into the practice. So she's the massage therapist for the All Blacks, and Rebecca is just amazing. And so I'll talk about some other stuff. We do capnometry, and I'll talk about that. But if I have a capnometry patient where their CO2 is low, I can send them to Rebecca, and she'll often say, it's just like glad wrap around their chest, and she'll release all that and we'll bring their CO2 up. So we've talked about biochemistry, we've talked about structural, like there's dural tension and various things that applied kinesiology chiropractors address. And then there's other areas of physiology. So we measure capnometry, that's measuring the carbon dioxide. And so we get nasal prongs and we run it through a unit, it's about $6,000, which is really unfortunate because I believe this should be in every single general practice. And there's people around the world trying to make these units so that people can measure this at home. But when you look at carbon dioxide, it is actually critically important. It's one of the biggest missing pieces that we have in standard practice. We learn about this in first year medicine, and we learn about something called the oxygen dissociation curve. And so the way I explain that to patients is, if you think about it, the red blood cell carries oxygen, and we need oxygen to power our energy systems. And the red blood cell is exactly like a bus. And so the oxygen hops on and the oxygen hops off. And the question is, how does the bus driver know when to open the door? And so it needs to open the door and let the oxygen on when the oxygen is low and when it's high, in the lungs, and open the door and let it off when it's low, like in the brain. And so one of the ways that the red cell tells where it is, because being a red cell, getting around a blood vessel is exactly like the London Underground. So I don't know if you've ever been in the London Underground, but there's no, like in New York, you can tell where you are. There's the graffiti that means that you're at 32nd Street, but in the London Underground, it's a tube, and it's only when you come out and all of a sudden, there's this sign in Piccadilly Square that you know where you are, and then bam, you're back in this tube with no delineators. And so it's like the red cell. It's like it. And here in New Zealand, if you want to know where the wind's coming from, you lick your finger and stick it in the wind, and you can kind of tell. So the red cell is going, what's the CO2 like? So
Yep.
if the CO2 is high, then it must be in the tissues where they're metabolizing and producing CO2. So now it's time for the oxygen to hop off. So then the oxygen hops off, and if it's the opposite, then it doesn't. So what happens when people overbreathe is that their CO2 drops, and then their CO2 is down in their tissues, and then the oxygen doesn't hop off. So if we get somebody and we put a pulse ox on them, and they've got a saturation of 98 or 100, if their CO2, the lower their CO2 is, the less that oxygen hops off. And we can have people who are effectively at the brain level seeing an oxygen level of like 82 or 88 or something like that.
Wow.
So it's something that we do for all of our anxiety patients. If you have a look, there's a website, I think it's just Freestyle, what is it? Freespira.com, and so SPIRA.com. This is a company in America where they have capnometer units where they rent them out to people, and it's FDA, Federal Drug Administration approved, within 28 days of training twice a day for 17 minutes to develop what we call CO2 tolerance. So get it so that the CO2 is normal, because people have to get used to that. And I could explain why that is, but
like breath holding and things like that,
no,
like
it's actually extending the exhale is the main thing. But then if the lips are restricted, because there's a number of reasons why somebody's CO2 is going to be low, and we're busy looking at all those reasons. And then when they get their CO2 up, the oxygen can actually be received in the brain.
Gotcha.
And so what they show is that they've got something like an 80 something. It's on their website. They've got numbers. So it's FDA approved to address anxiety disorder at about 86% within 28 days.
Wow.
73% of those people remain anxiety free or
just through breath work
in a year, panic attack free in a year. Panic attacks and anxiety. And the reason is, and this is one of the things that I explain to patients, is that I don't know if you've ever heard of Daniel Siegel. He's got the hand model of the brain. And so he says that the brain looks like this. There's the frontal lobe, which is your knuckle. If you wrap your knuckles around your thumb, so the frontal lobe, which is thinking, it's rational, it uses words, and it's time bound. So you can talk to it. And that's what we do when we do cognitive behavioral therapy. Where your thumb is tucked under your fingers is the limbic system. It's the emotional brain. It does not use words. It only knows what it feels. And so what happens is that in our society, we encourage everybody to emotionally regulate. What that means is that the frontal lobe is telling the limbic system what to do. And if you don't have enough CO2 and you don't have enough oxygen, you don't have enough ATP production to be able to run the fast connection speeds you need between the frontal cortex and the limbic system to tell the limbic system to stand down. So the example that I give patients is this, and this is for people with head injury and also just generally regulating. I often tell them the story about Joe. So Joe is this gentleman who lives in a small town, and he's had a really bad head injury, and everybody knows him. He's a bit of a character, and once a week he goes off to the supermarket, and he has two people that go with him to just kind of mind him, and they stand on either side of him. And so Joe's at the supermarket, and this cute little kid with pigtails comes along, and bounces and accidentally jumps on his toe and keeps on going. And so Joe starts lumbering off after the kid. Hey, like, what did you do? And so for you and I, when somebody like a kid jumps on our toe, inside us, we have this response. It's a danger threat. And we are so fast with our neural speeds that we assess the meaning, and we assess this was unintentional. It's not going to happen again. It's not a danger. And we stand things down. But that needs power. And when we look at people who've had head injuries, they don't have the connection speeds to be able to regulate. There they are at home, and all of a sudden somebody does something small, and bam, they've fired off. And so
I've got that problem.
Yeah, well, cryptopyrroles and a few things will do that. And I had that problem as well. I've got cryptopyrroles, but my cryptopyrroles only occur and get going if I have dairy. That's for me. And so why that's really important is that Sabrina Fisher has written a book on neurotherapy in PTSD. And what she says is that people who have PTSD, what happens in their brain is that their limbic system refers to their brainstem. So this is the frontal lobe, the frontal lobe is your knuckle,
Yep.
limbic system, your thumb, and your wrist would be the brainstem.
Mm-hmm.
And what Daniel Siegel says is people flip their lid and they get an
Yeah.
exposed limbic system when they're not
Wow.
regulated. And what Sabrina Fisher says is that people refer to their brainstem. So immediately they're reacting like their heart rate's going up, their blood pressure's going up. And if you can get it so that the frontal lobe is regulating, then you don't get all that autonomic arousal. And having the right CO2,
Yeah.
getting the right oxygen to the mitochondria to make ADP is a really big part of that. And so, and what else is really important about that is that if we don't have enough oxygen actually being delivered, then the frontal lobe regulates the vagal nuclei in the brainstem. And the vagal nuclei, and everybody on your podcast will know this because the vagus, with the 10th cranial nerve that goes down past your ears, and the only transcutaneous area is the tragus. So you can use vagal nerve stimulators by
Yep.
by skin, transcutaneous vagal nerve. There's implantable vagal nerve stimulators that will actually cure, in some cases, rheumatoid arthritis in various conditions.
Wow.
So the vagus
Resimax is another one that's quite good.
Resimax, yes, yeah, and so the heart, the lungs, and most of the abdominal contents. So when we're looking at the vast number of people now that we've got in our society who've got what's termed irritable bowel, the research shows that 76% of those people have actually got bacteria in the wrong place. So we should have,
Yep.
and so what I say to patients is that if you look at the digestive system, there's the food tube going down the esophagus, and there's the stomach, and there we should be secreting acid. And then there's the small bowel. And I say to patients that the small bowel is just like your kitchen bench. You want your kitchen bench to be completely clean because it's where you chop up your food for you to eat.
Yeah.
So if your kitchen bench was covered in bacteria, that wouldn't be very good, and the bacteria would start eating your food. And then there's the large bowel, which an analogy is exactly the same as a septic tank. It's full of bacteria. You don't want to stick Jif in your septic tank because your septic tank won't work. So we have about 2 kilograms of bacteria in our large bowel, and those bacteria help to produce lots of nutrients and various things we need. So in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which causes 76% of irritable bowel.
Yep. SIBO.
Yeah, SIBO. These bacteria have backed up from the large intestine into the small intestine, and the vagus. There's many people who are doing protocols for addressing SIBO. So we have, microbiome labs and various other companies. And that's really great, but it's only one of 4 components that are needed for addressing SIBO. So there's the bacteria that are in the gut, but there's also the nervous system and the vagus. So this is why understanding physiology, you get somebody in your room who's got SIBO and you're busy testing their CO2 and addressing that.
Wow.
And you can talk to Buteyko breathing practitioners, and many of them have got patients who have had irritable bowel that clean up by doing breathing training, and this is why.
Because you're calming that whole vagal.
So there's the bacteria, bacteria, and then there's the vagus and the nerve, and then there's actually the nutrition for the nerve. So we need vitamin B1, particularly.
Thiamine, yeah.
Yep, thiamine.
Elliot
and
Overton on,
And then there's actually the environment of the gut. So the gut needs to be at about negative 300 nanovolts, and it has to millivolts, sorry, and it has to be anaerobic, not have oxygen. And if there's oxidative damage, then there becomes too much oxygen in the gut, and then bacteria that favor oxygen consumption start growing, and these really love carbohydrates, and then we get into a vicious cycle in our society where we're consuming carbohydrates, which you need thiamine, vitamin B1, for them to be processed. And so we have this number of people who have got gut problems because of breathing issues. Probably, I mean, I see a very select group of people who have had long-term problems who've kind of been everywhere else and don't have solutions, but maybe 10% of people would have their CO2 above 35, which is the minimum, 35 millimeters of mercury.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's something I never knew. I never knew anything about the CO2 side of things. That's all new to
So
me.
we were talking about what we've got in the jumping back. We were
Mm.
talking about what we have in the clinic. So there's the biochemical things, and
Mm-hmm.
there's the structural things. And so we're talking now about other physiology. So CO2. We also do heart rate variability training
Yep.
and monitoring in the clinic. And so we use heart math, and it gives a lot of people have Garmin watches and things like that that give them a number for their heart rate variability.
Yep.
But if you watch it in real time, you can actually modulate it. And there was published the number of papers on heart rate variability training is just out of the wall. And for brain, there's recently, I went to a conference last year in November. Oh no, it was in the May conference I went to, AAPB, and they presented a paper that it prevents Alzheimer's. So, and plaque formation, which makes sense. You know, you get the vagus working because that's what's happening when you're training. It's a way of training the vagus, and then there's less inflammation. And we know from Dale Bredesen's work and all the researchers in that field that inflammation causes, plaque formation. So we do capnometry, we do heart rate variability, we test autonomics more specifically. We have something called Nerve Express in the clinic where we differentially measure sympathetic and parasympathetic. So there's biochemistry and structural and physiology, and I guess also in physiology, in terms of equipment, we have got Shiftwave, which is a haptics chair. Haptics is like what's in your phone when it vibrates.
Yep.
This has been,
Sound,
yeah.
vibration and all
Yeah,
that.
this has been developed in America. There's about 20 or 30 of them deployed in the Ukraine to treat PTSD and pain. So what it does is it exercises the autonomic nervous system, the fight and flight, and the rest in the digest, and it gives that a hormetic kind of stress and pushes it one way or the other. And it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever done progressive muscle relaxation where you tense up your hands and
Yep.
Yeah. And what happens when you do that, you tense the different muscles and then you relax them. It's like the brain goes, oh, wow, it's a reset. Oh, I didn't realize I was carrying that tension and the different.
Yeah, you let go.
Yeah, and so shift wave in a way is working like that, and it's got different frequencies that you can run for different problems, so we run that. The CVAC is cyclic variations in altitude simulation, altitude conditioning, sorry, and it's the opposite of hyperbaric. It's hypobaric, but it has hyperbaric. You just take the pressure up like 1.5 atmospheres or whatever, and you leave it there, and you're driving oxygen into the cells. In this particular case, what you're doing is you're decreasing the pressure and you're creating a hormetic stress on the cells. There's research to show that there's phase differential across the cytosol, that's the internal area inside the cell, and so the kind of liquidity or the osmotic concentration, and so when you're creating this pressure difference, it's almost like the cells readjusting. Oh, where am I and where's my boundary?
And going up and down, up and down.
Yeah,
I've
and
been
so-
in your machine. It's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
cool. Yeah.
So,
Amazing.
so it goes to like 2,600, it's an American, so it goes to
Yep.
2,600 feet. It's simulated, so it reduces the air density in the cabin. It's
Yep.
the cabin that hermetically seals and then modulates the internal cabin pressures. So, and 2,600, and then it'll oscillate, and then it'll go a little bit higher. And so what's happening is it's reconditioning the cells as to where they are. What we know from the research is that that what that does is it alters something called phase angle, which is a composite of measurement of the cellular membrane differential charge held across all the cells in the body. And phase angle is correlated with outcomes in cancer. And I'm not saying that this, I'm not making
Yeah.
that statement.
No, we're not making any claims
Medical
here.
legally. Yeah, but so. It's phasing, and also what it does is it increases, we know this from research, that it increases VO2 max. And so VO2 max, again, is that ability for the body to consume oxygen and be able to use it. But what we see, and the reason why I got it, sometimes I sort of just like get a feeling about things. And I was at a conference, and Rick Abbey out of Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, is a neurotherapist, and he was presenting a case that he had of a patient who had a dementia, and it was, I don't know what their mocha would have been, but they didn't recognize their family. So I'm guessing they were sort of down around 10 or 3, or something really low.
bad.
He pulled them out completely. This was 8 years ago, first NeuroField conference. And amongst the number of things he used was CVAC. And so I heard about it. I just, I thought this is...
I'd love to try that with Mum, because I reckon like with her
definitely.
hydrocephalus as well, that could
Well, that's the question. So what we think is happening, and we don't have proof for this, is that there's research on the lymphatic circulation. So in the
Hmm.
body, there's the lymphatic circulation that circulates and kind of cleans up the extra overspill from the veins and the arteries. Well, basically the veins, and so they discovered that there was a circulation, the lymphatic circulation in the brain, and the brain. This is what I say to patients: the brain is a little bit like a water-cooled computer, and so the
Hmm.
brain is very metabolically active. It only weighs 2 kilograms, but it's and sitting in a chair doing nothing, it's consuming about 20,
20%.
25% of your energy
Mm.
during the day. And that's very metabolically expensive. It produces metabolic waste, and that metabolic waste needs to be washed away. What we know is that when people go to sleep, the main function of sleep is this lymphatic circulation, and that
Yep.
there's this washing of the brain that occurs in sleep. We also know that in just about all the neurological conditions, whether it's dementia, Parkinson's, and after head injury, not for everyone, but definitely for some people, that there's an impairment of the lymphatic circulation. So that washing isn't occurring the way that it needs to. And when you look at the production of ATP by the mitochondria, ATP being energy production in the cells, this is the most incredible thing, but we produce our body weight in ATP every day.
Yeah, crazy. I don't know how to measure that, by the way, but
Yeah,
uh,
I don't know. Like, that looking at biochemical reactions and how much, ATP it needs. And so if you take somebody, and this is terrible, it's like not very, but the way that I liken it to patients is I think that it's pretty much like when you get the plunger in the bathtub and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
press
Well,
down.
that's why I think the CVAC would
Yeah,
might be
and when
good
you
for mum.
pull, yeah, so when you pull up, there's a negative pressure,
Yeah,
and so within the CVAC, with it changing in pressure and getting the lymphatic circulation back online, and we'll see this. So the reason why we've got it, it's really expensive compared to a
yeah.
hyperbaric, but
Jeez.
instead of a hyperbaric where you're talking, quite a few sessions, maybe $100
Yeah,
session, like 10, 20 sessions in, you're talking $1,000 to $2,000. We see changes within 5 minutes. And so, and in about 70% of people. So what we'll
yeah. I wish I
do
could get one.
before we get in, well, we're on that path, man. We're just talking about what is it that works and where are we going to put that in New Zealand? And that's
Yeah,
our
I
plan.
want to make it a new, our longevity brain clinic ideas. I wanted a new Plymouth because I need it for mum.
Well, that's
There's
the
not
thing,
much
if
population here.
financially we can show that this makes enough difference that it's
Yeah,
actually worth it. And so we're getting there. But so back on the nerdy trail of what it does. 'Cause I'm
yeah.
such a nerd. So then if you wash the brain really, like you switch that back on very quickly, the brain gets a wash, the cytokines drop down, the
Yeah.
mitochondria spark back up, they produce the ATP, and bam, the brain is on. So we'll get people,
Wow.
yeah, and we tell them before they get in, what's your fatigue score out of 10? What's your brain fog score? Because they're kind of two different things out of 10. Get them in there, get them out, get them to walk up and down the hall and rescore. And about 70% of people, they'll go, oh, wow, yeah, actually,
I've got
not
more energy.
everybody. Some people will put in there and they'll feel better, and then maybe and we'll put them in for another 5 minutes. We'll run it for an hour, if we're using it therapeutically. But we're just almost kind of testing when we get people in the clinic. What's their CO2? What's their heart rate variability? What's happening in the CVAC? What are we assuming their lymphatic circulation
It's
is?
insane data
And
collection.
if they
Wow.
sometimes they'll get a kind of blocked feeling in the head, bam, we've got them in Flow Presso. So Flow Presso is a lymphatic massage suit, and there's many things like this, like Normatec boots, but they're just the legs and not the
Yeah.
body. But this has been developed by Desiree Despong, and it's got the lymphatic massage component infrared, and it's also got a nano vibrational chip at the head, which is completely out of paradigm. But we've done EEG studies in the clinic and shown a change in the dominant frequency that makes sense with what we see with Flow Presso. Flow Presso, fantastic for long COVID. If there's a Flow Presso near
Oh, wow. Yeah.
so for our people who've got long COVID, straight up, they're in Flow Presso 3 sessions. If they're really sensitive and biochemically like they're on the edge, we'll only give them 20 minutes, and then we'll follow it immediately after. We'll give them bentonite clay binders, and then if
Hmm.
they're quite sensitive, then 2 hours later we'll give them a sachet of lipospheric vitamin C. We use Live On, but
Hmm.
another brand.
Yeah.
And
Live
then
on's best.
another 2 hours later, and we may even give them sachets of glutathione if they're really fragile. So the 20 minutes and chasing it and chasing the toxins, because you'll clean toxins with
Yeah.
lymphatics. And then we'd run it for 40 minutes once we get them kind of, and so 40 minutes, 3 sessions, they need to be between 3 and 7 days apart. And we find that with that, we use that and NAC,
Yep.
and often we might use transfer factor multi-immune by research nutritionals. We'll find about a 70% response rate for long COVID. And then if there's still anything going on, we'll be after that looking at that more physiological, which physiological baskets are out and how are we going to address that. So we see people with long COVID, and I think we use Neuronic. There's research on that as well. And
Yeah, I've got my
yep,
Neuronic helmet. Yep.
depending on what the person's needs are. But our response rate with long COVID is sort of around about that 90. I don't know that there's too many people we haven't been able to.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of young athletes that, we've been
Yes,
talking about
yeah,
one. I
yeah.
want to get both of those young guys actually to come down. I think they probably need a couple of weeks listening to you down there. So, yeah, to really chase all this up, because, when you're working biochemically like we're doing with supplements and the right exercise and, hyperbaric hopefully, but to put all this in a really intensive couple of weeks might be a really
Well,
good
when
idea.
we were talking intensive, so we talked about the biochemistry, we talked about structural, we talked about various physiological baskets, lymphatics and breathing and heart rate variability, autonomics. And then the other thing that we do in the clinic is brain. So we measure brain waves. And so there's lots of interesting information about the brain. So the brain, when you do an EEG, the way that the EEG was discovered was by Hansberger in about 29, somewhere around there. And he was in the armed forces in Turkey or somewhere, and he was crossing a road one day, and a horse and cart came around the corner at a really high speed, and he would just 100% thought he was going to die. And so his sister wrote him he didn't. He jumped out of the way in time. And his sister wrote him a letter. And it was like, it's sent by urgent whatever horse or whatever at that time, because it was in the 1800s. It took him a while to discover this. And sent him this letter and said, "What's wrong? I feel, like, are you okay?" And he recognized that there was somehow that she picked up that there was something wrong. And he spent the rest of his life looking for it. And he thought
Wow.
it might be the electricity in the brain. And he was the first one to name the brain waves that we see. And the first one he named was the alpha wave, which is 8 to 10 cycles a second. So brain waves, they're kind of packaged in fours. So 0 to 4 is delta. That's the most common brainwave in sleep, say, and 4 to 8 is theta, and say meditation, and then 8 to 12 alpha. And then there's low beta and high beta and gamma. And so in the clinic, we measure those brain waves, but that's only the top 3 millimeters, the surface of the
Oh,
brain.
wow.
You look at an EEG, and then you can use Loretta, which source localizes using a composite of EMG and EEG to look at the activity in the brain. And what we can do is we can take that activity and compare it to normative databases. So people who don't have autism, anxiety, depression, various things, and we can look down into voxels, 5 by 5 millimeters and even smaller, and compare that brain with other people's brain and tell where it's out, and cross-correlate that with functional MRI studies looking at functionality in the brain to be able to determine if somebody has anxiety, say, for example, or depression. Depression might be increased alpha in the left.
We don't have a functional MRI down there, do you?
No, I don't. I think there is functional MRI available up in Auckland, but the cross correlation occurs kind of in the research and the understanding of functionality.
Right.
You're not using functional MRI. There is a clinic over in the States that I've visited quite a few times,
Yeah.
in Provo, Utah, where they're using a functional MRI to delineate
Yeah.
dysfunction in the brain for post-concussion syndrome, and using a very dedicated and targeted rehab to address head injury with a 70% cure rate within 1 week, validated by the Swedish government. So we're using brain-computer interface to have a look at how the brain is working, and then to train the brain. So we use something called NeuroField. It's some of the latest technology, and it's a combination neurostim. So with neurotherapy, you can either train the brain by saying, do something and I'll tell you yes or no if you got it right. So the brain's trying to guess, and that's standard neurotherapy. Neurostim is actually putting energy and information in to say to the brain, just follow along with me, and it tends to work faster. So our unit uses a combination of photobiomodulation. So photobiomodulation upregulates mitochondrial energy because the infrared
red light. Yep.
light does that. And then it uses electrical, so TACS, transcranial alternating and direct current, TDCS. And so that increases neuronal excitability and ability, and also helps to guide frequencies. And then also PEMF. And PEMF specifically helps with blood flow. So if we're looking at people with head injuries, what we know, Dr. Allen from Cognitive FX, Mark Allen, has published on this, that what we see changing is neuroconnectivity and vascular neuro connection. So when the brain has the blood flow going to the right place, and it's called neurovascular coupling. So we can address neurovascular coupling, and we can address often the frequencies that are out. And so,
I've had Mark on as well. He's amazing.
Yeah. He's recently retired, which is yeah. So I went over the States twice last year, 3 times this year, and so and myself and Louise were going over very regularly and visiting these clinics where people have post-concussion syndrome, and they're turning it around for people with long-term post-concussion syndrome, and we see that as well. So the biochemistry, the structural, the physiological components, and then the brain neurophysiology, and what I believe in, and I often say to patients, is it's like lining everything up. We have this in medicine, we call it the Swiss cheese model for mistakes. And if a mistake is going to happen, it's like Swiss cheese. If you line up all the holes to make your way through, so that if the doctor prescribes the wrong thing, if the pharmacist doesn't pick it up, if the patient doesn't see it's the wrong color, it often takes quite a bit. Well, I think that it reversed that, and in a positive way of thinking, better.
Love that. Yep.
Lining everything up. So you line up the neurophysiology, and you get the CO2 online, and you get the autonomics online, and you get the biochemistry online.
Wow.
Structure online, and you just line it all up, and
bang, you get miracles. And this is the thing, Elizabeth. This is what we've all been trying to do with our complex cases, is trying to address all of these things. Now, I don't have a CVAC machine. I do have a hyperbaric. I do have red light. I do have neuronic helmet. So I have some of the kit that you have. I don't have all the incredible expertise and the genius brain that you have. But
it's so not true. That is actually completely false.
No, like you.
No, that actually is completely false. But moving right along. Okay, quick.
But people listening to this can tell, like, they're probably all like their heads are spinning. But bear with us, people, because you will find the gems when you listen to Elizabeth for long enough. But then you're really approaching it in a holistic manner, as best you can, and then adding on new things when you find that this person didn't respond to any of that. So what else is there? Because there's always an answer. Like one of my young athletes at the moment, long COVID, got POTS syndrome. I really want to get him down to see you, as well as long COVID and other things. He's reading on the internet, it is incurable. It cannot be fixed. And I'm like,
wait. Well, there's a wonderful. If you want to listen to it, there's a wonderful podcast, and where I learned a lot about POTS on FX Medicine. It's an Australian. It's not FX Med, the company here in New Zealand. It's FX Med podcast, and it's Dr. Donahue, and so he talks about POTS. They've got one session and another session. That first session, amazing. 70% of POTS. 70% of POTS is due to viruses, and usually due to long-term ED, glandular fever, and so we use transfer factor multi-immune and transfer factor plasmic, which you can't get anymore. It's a plasmic.
Actually, Rejuvenate Pro hits a lot of the same.
And it probably does. And
it's got all the trans factors and growth factors. I should do a comparison between transfer factor multi-immune and Rejuvenate.
Well, I'll start using it with my
we use both, I have a look.
Patients, maybe if I use it maybe 4 a day or something like that.
With someone young and got no other they're not on warfarin or clopidogrel or any of those things, those
Well, that's
blood
the other
thinners. You
thing.
can
Yeah.
go up.
I
Yeah.
emailed
But
Daniel to ask him what,
yes,
what
I've
the
answered
reactions are.
you. So yeah, I've sent you
Oh,
back an
great, good,
answer
good.
of
So most
which
of the patients I've had haven't been on medicine, but yesterday
no.
I had a patient who was on medication.
Yeah. So I've written you back
So,
the things for that.
yeah, and then I was thinking in terms of the message, because everything that we talk about needs to have a point, and the point, in what we're talking about, the point is that there is this huge body of work. People are getting up, they're having their breakfast. You imagine them, they're in their car, they're going to work, they're doing this research, they're publishing it, and they're hoping that they're going to be able to connect to the people who need to hear it to make.
Yeah, and they can't.
And so we can make that connection. And here in the clinic, we've been working on an IT kind of build out idea of a platform that would allow for the rapid delivery and all encompassing support for patients. And so I was thinking, as I was driving here, what do I say? And so I think the first thing for your listeners is that there's hope, that a lot of what we're seeing in standard medicine, we can do amazing things in emergency medicine. I've been in the emergency department and had patients where, you're in there and you're working as hard as you can. You think, oh, I just don't think this person's going to make it, and then you go and you get back to the ED in the morning and you say, how did so-and-so go? And they're up in ICU, and you go up to ICU to visit them. They're sitting there eating breakfast and they're about to be discharged, and it's just like the most incredible thing.
Yeah.
But when we apply that acute symptom-based philosophy and chronic,
chronic.
and often I'm drawing people a graph that if you look at when people have got a symptom, that there's a number of things that have occurred, and then they get over the symptom bar. And in conventional medicine, what we're doing is trying to get them back under the bar. But health resilience is actually how far you are from baseline. And so when we have a model of medicine where we can measure all these things, and a really good example would be Dale Bredesen is, the HOMA IR, insulin sensitivity. So instead of just measuring blood sugar, we measure fasting insulin and have a look at insulin resistance and get in there well before there's metabolic imbalance.
Yeah, don't wait till they're diabetic.
Well, when you
God's sake.
diagnose diabetes as an actually disease, then the disease leads to heart attacks and peripheral vascular disease and kidney disease and things like that. But we need to be working further back, and that's what Peter Attia is talking about. So we have this body of these amazing researchers that have done this amazing work, and then we've got these amazing clinicians on the ground who are working like crazy and are overloaded. And the question is, now is our chance as people, as doctors, as a society, to make the connection and to make that available. And it's not just the knowledge, because there's lots of knowledge out there, but what does it look like on the ground?
How do we get it into the clinics? How do we get it past regulation?
We've developed that in the clinic. We've got a really good idea of that, and we are really looking for, if there's anybody who's interested in partnering, we don't think it would take very much funding, maybe in the order of 30,000, even if that, to be able to prove that model, and then we have clinics around New Zealand where we prove it. In the head injury space, we've got a group that started. Holly came down. You might have seen her. She posted Shane Christie's partner. Unfortunately, Shane Christie passed from suicide, so now we're jumping into head injury. And so Shane was involved in the Billy Guyton Foundation, because Billy Guyton passed due to suicide, and then Shane passed due to suicide. So we have these people with head injuries who are just so desperate, and they don't have any solutions. And so Holly came, and so now we've got a group. At the moment, we're calling it Knock Stop. We're kind of looking at what we call it, but we've got a 3-pronged strategy that we're looking at building out.
I want to join them.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're very welcome. And so having kits in all the pharmacies in New Zealand that actually address the inflammation in the brain, because when people have head injuries, we don't actually address the main thing, which is inflammation in the brain. We just rest. And so another time I can talk more about that. But I guess, Dr. Gordon's talked about that really thoroughly. And if you're your listeners.
I'll cross-link to those podcasts with Dr.
So
Gordon and
so the
Peterson.
question is that, like, there's what Dr. Gordon talks about. How do we make that available for everybody? And not
Yeah,
everybody we're going to be able to give hormones because you need to do the testing. So there's this really simple Hoffer in 2013, a U.S. Army surgeon published a paper, The Amelioration of Blast Trauma, looking at giving NAC to people within the first 24 hours of head injury, and showed that there was a 44% reduction in those that went on to post-concussion syndrome. And we've used it in the clinic with people who've had post-concussion syndrome 3 years ago. I've
yeah,
had people walk in with a scat 5 of like in 78, and put them in the CVAC. They drop to 18, walk out at 18, put them on NAC. They stay at 18, stay like that. They start doing more work, and then we just tune up their hormones a little bit, and they're flying. You know.
yeah, I know.
So anyway,
Pretty
in
crazy.
terms of this strategy, what we're aiming to do is put kits into pharmacies so that people can address neuroinflammation at the time of head injury, have clinics around New Zealand that are doing this sort of work. So there's an 80-20 rule. Like, most people are going to respond to that. Those that don't, they can come into a clinic like we run, and then having a super clinic up in Auckland. And we're talking about that for Louise, and you know, I can travel up there, but getting a gyrostim maybe, or something like that. There's some really even bigger bits of kit that we need funding for. So funding for this basic IT system so that we can actually deliver medicine 3.0. And then in these kits, we're working with Nancy from the Devonport 7-Day Pharmacy. She's so amazing. Oh my gosh. Like, she's so amazing. She's such a switch person. And within one day, she's already talking about how to design the kits and things. So we're all really excited.
Wow.
Anybody who wants to get in behind this, where this is in the Billy Guyton Foundation, all the proceeds will be going to the Billy Guyton Foundation. So we're really excited about that. But for your listeners, here we are. Let's go. Like, we can do this.
And don't put up with when you're told that something is incurable, like
But it's
POTS
not
or
so
a
much that,
person,
Lisa, it's the design. What does that look like? You know, it's rather than people having to invent it themselves and listen to lots of things and figure out what's wrong for them. We've got a system. We just need some IT backing, and that we can actually plant on the ground that all the stuff that you're talking about, we can
got to be doable
on the ground, and then we can implement something. And our goal is to see at least a 10%, if not 20%. I believe it could be 44, you know, like Hoffer's research, but a percent actual reduction in the number of people with post-concussion syndrome in New Zealand. And that's where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just such a, I mean, it is, everybody can hear the passion in Elizabeth's voice to get this thing going and to help so many more people than we're helping currently. Because when you have a concussion, I mean, you know, I've dealt with mum's brain injuries, and I've had concussions myself, and all of my clients that have had concussions, and they're just told to go home and rest, and they do a CT scan and they tell them there's nothing wrong, and they haven't had one, and it's just, they're not even given, you know, your basic stuff like your NAC, like your fish oils, your curcumins, your plasmalogens, you know, these things that could be helping on from a biochemical point of view, and then the exercise protocols, the eye exercises, the neurochiro part of the equation, and then all of the fancy gadgets that you have, and I have some of them, that can really get people back to baseline. You know, we worked together on a case last year of a young man, you know, not able to work, massive concussions, jaw problems, had many accidents in sport. He's back at work now. He's just like loving life again and back into it after being absolutely on the
You're
floor.
so cool.
You know, I just love it. You know, I just love, you know, and not everybody's a success, but you know, if we can get a good portion of those who are really dedicated, and like this young man was really dedicated to getting back, because it costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of time, costs a lot of effort. You had to fly down to Dunedin, all of that type of stuff. But if you're willing to do the hard yards, I do find that there are crazy, amazing people out there that can help you, like Elizabeth, or even
Like
me,
Lisa.
and Louise, and many others. So don't give up is the message, and keep learning, keep researching, keep listening to podcasts like this. Elizabeth, I better go and rescue Mum. She's been on the bike for an hour, so I better go and get her off. But we will do this again, and we'll focus in on a different, you know, particular area of the brain or something like that, so that we stay a little bit more on point, because today we've gone right across the board to give people a bit of a spectrum of the things that you're talking about and the things that they need to think about. And you probably need to listen to this on half speed, but there's some real gems in there, Elizabeth. And I just want to thank you for being such a wonderful mentor to me and to being available to me when I've had, mum emergencies and things like that. You're one of those, one of the good people of the world. That's all I want to say. One of the good people of the world. So thank you, Elizabeth, for being on the show.
Oh, no, completely. Thank you. Yeah.